everyone. Reggie, it's so good to be here with you.
It is great to be here. Look at this full house.
Yeah. Not bad. Thank you. So we've got a lot to talk about today. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the gaming business. There's this thing called the Metaverse, which we're all trying to figure out. There's big M&A, some scandals, blockchain.
Scandals? We're going to talk about scandals?
Yes, we're going to talk about scandals. That's just the tease. And you have a new book out.
I have a new book out.
So we're going to start with you. Your book, coming out in May, is called Disrupting the Game, From the Bronx to the Top of Nintendo. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. Your parents moved to the US in the 50s, I believe, Haitian immigrants, and had to kind of start over.
Absolutely. So again, thanks for being here. Thanks to the group here. So my background and my upbringing really is, on one hand, untraditional, but on the other hand, very much a traditional immigrant story. So Emily, as you said, my parents came from Haiti. They left Haiti as the brutal dictator Francois Duvalier was taking power. In Haiti, my parents were college educated. My grandfather on my father's side was in the Haitian military. My grandfather on my mother's side was part of the previous democratic government, but they had to leave to get away from what was going on in that country. They settled in the Bronx, where I spent the first 8 years of my life. And the Bronx is a tough place today, was a tough place back then. Today the Bronx still has the congressional district with the highest level of poverty and child poverty. Mm-hmm. So my background from that standpoint was different. It was untraditional. And it was important for me to tell this story because oftentimes people look at executives like me and figure, everything has been wonderful right from the get-go. And it wasn't. It was a tough upbringing. In my book, I tell the story that when I was 4 or 5 years old, we lived on a 5th floor of a 5-story walk-up tenement building in the Bronx. There was a stabbing on the roof of the building, and that morning, my family and I were slated to go have a picnic with members of our family. And I tell the story that as we're leaving to go to the car to have this picnic, my mother is telling me and my brother, when we're going down the stairs, look up, don't look down. Look up. And when you're 4 or 5 years old, your parent tells you to do something, what do? You do the complete opposite. And it's because, dripping on the floor all the way out the door of the 5 stories were drops of blood because of the stabbing that had happened on the roof. And the drops started small, but as you proceeded down the 5 flights, they got bigger and bigger and bigger. At the doors exiting the building, there was a lot of blood. The person survived, but that was the motivating factor for my family to say we needed to leave this part of the Bronx. We moved out to Long Island. But I share these stories in the book really as a way to share my own stories. Hopefully the readers will find some inspiration and some perspective. The focus of the book is really to give perspective on the things that I've done and the choices that I've made.
So how did you get out of that? I mean, you talk in the book, your parents working blue-collar jobs, making your way, a minority among your classmates. How do you go from there to becoming the head of Nintendo in America?
Yeah, so for me, it was fortunate. I saw education as my pathway, and I did well in school. I was able to progress through all of my early education. Was able to get a scholarship to Cornell University. And that choice is one of a handful that were key choices for me that set me on my path. And to this day, I'm passionate about educational issues. I'm very involved with Cornell today. I think there's some Cornell folks here attending.
Anyone represent?
But it's the education path for me was my journey out and my ability to have a variety of different experiences and effectively to bootstrap myself, through life.
You took Nintendo on an incredible ride. 2003, you joined. The Wii comes out in 2006. Talk to me about that ride and what drove you and the company to make some of these really transformational changes.
Sure. Well, a couple things. It wasn't just me, right? There is a fabulous team at Nintendo. The developers create world-class products. But it's important to put this in perspective. In 2003, Nintendo was in a tough position. The PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2 had redefined the gaming industry. The PlayStation 2 had launched the year prior and was doing fantastically well in the marketplace. The PlayStation 2 was backwards compatible, meaning all of the consumers that had bought into the proposition were really encouraged to buy the next generation and to continue playing all of their own games. At the same time that Nintendo was launching its version into that generation, the GameCube, a small little company also from Redmond, Washington called Microsoft launched the Xbox. So that was the environment I was walking into. Both GameCube and Xbox had been out in the marketplace for a year. PlayStation was running away with the industry. Microsoft was doing very unique and distinctive things, really with connected play. All of my trusted advisors told me not to take the job.
Why?
A Japanese parent, right? And working for a Japanese parent can be challenging. Cultural differences in how to approach business. The other piece of perspective was that Nintendo was under fire from a business perspective, from Sony with its PlayStation, from Microsoft. So I was being counseled not to take the role. But I saw something different. I saw opportunity. I saw that the company had a legacy of innovation. All of the things that you take for granted today in gaming systems, joysticks, directional controllers, had all been done first by Nintendo. But the other piece that really compelled me to take the job was that at the very end of my interviewing process, I asked to meet with the global president of Nintendo, a gentleman by the name of Satoru Iwata.
Basically like the godfather of
right,
Nintendo.
Right, the key guy, the first non-family member of the Yamauchi family to be running Nintendo. This is a person who had a world-class pedigree as a game designer and had been promoted to be president of Global Nintendo about 18 months prior. And here I am being hired to be head of sales and marketing for the company, and I asked to have a video conference, which I learned later almost cost me the job. Because here's this American, this brash marketer asking to spend time with the president of the company. But the reason I did it was that I knew for me to be successful, I needed to have a great direct relationship with this individual. He and Shigeru Miyamoto, right, the father of Mario and all of the great franchises, those were the two key people in Japan that I needed to have a great relationship with. And I asked to meet with him. It was supposed to be a half hour, turned into an hour-long conversation. But that's what compelled me to take the job. And we were able to do wonderful things. Before the Wii was the Nintendo DS, which to this day is the second best-selling system of all time in the video game business. And within that, I talk about in the book, it started off slowly. we showed the Nintendo DS at my very first E3, and the initial reaction wasn't all that positive. The company, we were showing a prototype of the physical design, and we were showing effectively demos of the games. Based on the feedback we heard, we had to, and we did redesign the physical hardware to make it sleeker. And we went on to launch genre-defining games in the Mario and Pokemon and Metroid franchises. So, the key here is, asking for what you need, right, in terms of being able to be comfortable and taking on a big job, and then being aggressive and pushing a point of view, because all of these things weren't going to happen unless I was pushing for these points of view.
We're taking questions from the audience, by the way, so if you have anything, please submit. What was it like working at a company, a Japanese company, as a non-Asian, non-white executive? Question from Julian here. Please elaborate on how you dealt with the Nintendo corporate culture as a quote-unquote very energetic and brash American exec.
So, what was great for me was that the company saw my ideas and my aggressiveness as a very positive influence. They wanted that. I was very transparent as I was coming on board that I would be pushing for new and novel things because the company needed that injection of new thinking because what was being done wasn't working. So there was an acceptance of me pushing these ideas, and if that culture didn't exist, I would not have lasted 15 plus years at the company. But I was supported by my boss, Satoru Iwata. My ideas worked in the marketplace, and that's the other thing that's important. I could have been brash and pushing all kinds of ideas, but if they weren't working in the marketplace, it would have been a much shorter ride.
At one of your early presentations, you took a really aggressive stance against the competition, Sony and Microsoft, and this coming from a conservative Japanese company. You said, I believe, at the top, my name is Reggie, I'm about kicking ass, taking names, and making games. And I'm pretty sure that set off a firestorm of memes.
Yeah, it did. So
they started calling you the Reginator.
They did call me the Reginator. I think someone earlier today yelled at me the Reginator. So, but first I want to correct you. The last part of that statement was we're about making games. And that was important because, again, it's not me, it was the entire company, the entire proposition. We were embarking on a whole new journey to push the company forward. So we're about making games. But that brash statement, had to be supported by Nintendo in Japan, which they did, because they really saw that we had the opportunity to upend the gaming market. The Nintendo DS, the Wii that launched shortly thereafter, even today with the Nintendo Switch, which has just surpassed the sales of the Wii, and I think right now is the third or fourth best-selling system of all time, and it's only been out there for 5 years. So I was supported. We actually delivered the goods on the variety of ideas, and yeah, I pushed a lot of new and novel ideas out into the marketplace. You
pivot from the Wii to the Switch, ultimately, towards the end of your time at Nintendo. You leave in 2019. Why did you leave? So, my boss, my mentor, my friend, Satoru Iwata, passed away in 2015. And, he and I were just about the same age. And he passed from a form of cancer. And, he and I had worked together at that point, over 10 years. And so when that happens, when that touches so close to the bone, it really creates
a need for you to step back and evaluate, what am I doing? Am I having fun? Am I doing things that are really fulfilling? And I was having a lot of fun at Nintendo, but I wanted to do more. I wanted to share my learnings on a much broader stage like this. I wanted to help young executives go on their own pathway. I wanted to do board service. I wanted to spend more time with Cornell. And when you're running a company, Nintendo of America was the biggest part of global Nintendo, half of the sales and profits. When you're running the company, you can't do all of those things. So, that drove my thinking to do something new and to begin laying the groundwork of when's going to be the right time for me to leave. The company needed to be on a positive path. We needed to have great people in place. As a senior executive, the worst thing you could do is retire and see the company stumble. So it was important to have great people in place and business momentum. But I wanted to do other things.
Like be on the board of Gamestop, which we're going to talk about a little later. That lasted about a year. What are you most proud of? Question from Amy during your time at Nintendo.
I am most proud of the business culture that I helped shape, the people that I grew to take on bigger and bigger jobs, whether they were at Nintendo or moved on to do other things. That's what I'm most proud of, the culture aspect of being a leader and being an executive. Yeah, the product launches were fun, being called the Reginator was fun, but shaping the culture, and not just of Nintendo of America, what I did helped touch the culture in the Japanese home market, in the European business. Shaping the culture is what I'm most proud of.
Let's talk about where the gaming industry is going, and culture is a big part of that. But before we get there, I want to talk to you about this thing called the Metaverse. What is it exactly? Is it going to be as big as some people think it will be? And how do we get there?
Yeah, so I think that first question is the most important one. What is the Metaverse? And I think Metaverse is just like cloud of 5 years ago, and even the internet of 20 years ago. It's a label that every business is trying to grab onto to say that their business is part of the Metaverse. For me, the Metaverse is a digital space where you interact with your friends in a social and I believe gaming type of environment. So it's social, it's digital, and there's an ability to really interact with friends and people who have the potential to be your friends. I believe that elements of the Metaverse already exist, right? Fortnite, big cultural events, performers in a digital game interacting with their fans. It's happening today. Roblox is an example of the Metaverse. Wide range of different types of experiences, all tied together with one currency. That's happening today. So, I believe that we are well on our path to this type of Metaverse opportunity, but my definition and my visual is maybe a bit different than how other people are talking about it.
Facebook's pivot to the Metaverse, not just pivoting, but changing their name to Meta. Do you think they'll succeed?
I'm not a buyer of that idea. I don't think that their current definition is going to be successful.
Why not?
Why do I say that? I say that because first, and I don't know if anyone from Facebook is here, but you have to admit that Facebook itself is not an innovative company.
Wow.
They're not. I mean, you look at, they have either acquired really interesting things like Oculus, like Instagram, or they've been a fast follower of other people's ideas. That's Facebook. So inherently, they are not an innovative company other than the very original social platform that was created many years ago.
So what do you think Mark Zuckerberg is getting wrong here?
Well, I believe that in order to be innovative, you really need to be thinking about the consumer first, and I don't think they do. I think you need to be looking at...
What do they think about first?
Well, I think they think about advertising revenue first because that's 98% of their revenue. I mean, that's the fact. But you have to think about your consumer, you have to think about your customer. You need to think about bringing new and different ideas into the marketplace. You need to reward that within your culture. You know, these are the things that drive innovation. You need to have a culture of innovation. Anything that you do within an innovative company, whether you're in accounting, whether you're in product development, whether you're in marketing, you need to be challenging yourself to be doing things differently versus doing the same old, or copying someone else's idea. So, you know, that's why I look at the vision that's been to date articulated, and I'm not a believer. The other thing I would say about Facebook is they don't have a great history with physical products, right? Portal, you know, not a big idea.
Oculus.
They bought Oculus, and you know they've been working on it for a number of years. The last number I saw was that in total, and not just Oculus, in total, about 20 million VR devices have been sold. 20 million. You know, when I was running Nintendo, that was a good year, 1 year in terms of hardware sell-through.
So this idea, I mean, and there's obviously the combination of augmented and virtual reality. Facebook or Meta is really leaning into virtual reality. Are we really going to want to be living and working and playing with a headset on in virtual worlds for a significant part of our day?
I don't think so. And that's why I'm much more of a believer in AR. There's a lot of examples of successful AR today. I mean, Pokemon Go, right, is AR. Nintendo 3DS had AR capabilities. I think the idea of wearing a light set visuals, glasses, and using that at different points of your day to interact with a digital experience, I believe is in the end going to be much more compelling. And I say this as a person who has tried just about every VR device and just about every VR experience. I don't think it's ready for prime time yet. Doesn't mean it's not going to get there, but I don't believe that it's going to be an experience that you are doing 100% of your time, or even 100% of your entertainment time. I don't see it.
So what do you see? Take us 5, 10 years out. How much are augmented and virtual reality really part of our lives? How are they integrated into our lives? How do we experience the world through the lens of technology differently than we are today?
Sure. So I start with the point that in our future, entertainment is going to be much more immersive. I believe entertainment is going to blend both the physical and the digital world. I see that in our future. I think the types of experiences are going to continue to innovate and be new and different. You know, again, the example I use, Fortnite and this type of battle royale experience has only been in the marketplace about 4 years. And yet, we take it for granted. 4 years ago, that didn't exist. So I do believe 4 years from now, there's going to be different types of games, different types of gameplay experiences, different type of entertainment that's going to be incredibly compelling. As I said earlier, I believe it's going to be much more an AR type experience versus a VR type of experience.
And what companies own this experience? Which companies are you optimistic about? Who's on the right path?
Yeah. So I think let's start with big companies, and then we can ideate on small companies. In terms of the big company space, I think what Epic is doing is really compelling. What's interesting about Epic is that they're not only launching their own games, they're buying studios, and they have a game engine that helps bring all this to life, and that game engine more and more is being used in films. So that's a very interesting path, and I think they're doing things very interesting, in a very interesting way. In terms of smaller companies, we started by talking about big acquisitions. I think that the digital future is going to be driven by smaller companies, companies that are in their seed rounds, early rounds today, maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, at the precipice of going public. These are the companies that are really innovating and doing things that are different and speaking to a younger audience, which is going to be the consumer of this entertainment in the future.
So let's talk about the big M&A. Take-Two buying Zynga, Microsoft buying Activision, Sony buying Bungie. What is the driving force of this, and do you see more consolidation ahead?
So each of those acquisitions had a very specific strategy, right? So Take-Two and Zynga. Take-Two, fabulous game development company, has not had a lot of success in the mobile space. So buying a mobile-first company, and now think about taking Grand Theft Auto into a mobile experience, that's a big idea. The purchase of Bungie by Sony, for all of the great games that they've launched, really have not done as well in what the business calls live services. So this is a consumer interacting with a game constantly in a multiplayer type of experience. That has not been to date Sony's strong suit. They've done more single player type of experiences. So a very strategic purchase for them. The purchase of Activision by Microsoft, I think that was a great distressed buy, right? The stock price had lost a third with all of the cultural issues that the company has had. It was a fantastic purchase of, King mobile games, Call of Duty, just a fantastic purchase.
So let's talk about the distress and scandal, as I mentioned earlier. Activision facing some really serious lawsuits about sexual harassment, discrimination, unfair pay. I mean, a horrifying anecdote in the Wall Street Journal. One employee was raped by her supervisor, and the CEO, Bobby Kotick, didn't take action. What do you think went wrong here?
So, two things. First, culture is set at the top in any organization. Culture in an organization. Culture in an organization is the air that all the employees breathe. It's the way people act when the executives aren't in the room. And that is set by leadership. And so a bad culture was in place, and I have to say the CEO has to take responsibility for that. They set the tone. The second thing that went wrong is a governance issue. And I sit on 3 boards, 3 public companies. Mentioned Gamestop, I guess we'll get there in a moment. But the board is responsible for holding management accountable. The board is responsible for any type of significant lawsuits that are facing the company, significant risks. The board needs to be informed. The board needs to be taking action. I would argue the board didn't do its job.
So, and by the way, Activision has called some of these reports misleading. They say they're making changes to improve workplace culture. Do you think Bobby Kotick should stay on as CEO?
Look, that's going to be a decision that my good friend Phil Spencer and Satya make. That's not my call. But as an executive, I know that leaders set the culture, and that was a bad culture. And I have to tell you that it's not just Activision. Regrettably, the gaming industry has had a number of these types of situations, a number of them. I do believe that at its heart, Part of it is because 20, 25 years ago, it was predominantly a male-oriented industry. It's been slow to embrace really a broad diversity mandate. I think I was fortunate at Nintendo because I'm a black executive. I brought a cultural sensitivity, and certainly at Nintendo of America, we addressed some cultural issues. So it is a broad issue. It has to be owned. I've spent time with other companies since I've left Nintendo in the gaming space, sharing some thoughts about diversity and how to address it. But it's a big issue.
Well, and it's not just about diversity of the people building the games. It's serving a diversity of consumers. Women are increasingly playing games. Obviously, children everywhere play games. Are you seeing the progress that you would like to see across the gaming industry to make sure that you've got a diversity of developers around the world who are building products that billions of people use?
Yeah, it's clearly not moving fast enough. Not in the employee base, not even as simple as, again, as an African American, typically in a game, my choice of hairstyle is like 2, right? Forget about any type of diversity for, LGBTQ, any representation in games that isn't, typically white male is pretty limited. And that's an issue. This is a global industry, right? This is a global industry touching literally 3 billion people across the world. It's a $200 billion business. And the representation in the game, in management, in leadership is not at all where it needs to be.
So let's talk about Gamestop. You joined the board in 2020. Shares were $3 to $4 a piece. You left about a year later. Shares were closer to 200, down from a peak even before that. What happened?
Sure. So, as you say, I joined the Gamestop board April of 2020. Just as COVID was hitting, the popular opinion by investors was that GameStop was going to go bankrupt before the new systems by Sony and Microsoft were going to launch later that year. The shares of stock were being shorted, right? What that means is people are betting that even at $4 a share, the stock is going to go lower. And more shares were being shorted than were actually being held by individuals. So just think about that. What that means is, an individual makes their share available to be shorted, it's shorted, and then it's shorted again. So that was the backdrop that I entered as a board member. So of course you're going to ask the question, Reggie, why did you do this? And the answer is that I believe that the company could be successful. I believed that with taking the right action, that certainly the company would exist in time for the launch of the new systems. And a company that services the core gaming audience the way they do would be able to have a successful future. The company certainly needed to pivot in a number of ways. It needed to embrace e-commerce. It needed to find a way to better satisfy its consumer base. A number of things needed to happen, but I believe the company could be successful.
Then comes Ryan Cohen.
So, the new systems launch, the company is solvent. The company is able to maximize the sales of these new systems, and most importantly, the sales of the software, which is where the profitability is. Someone else saw opportunity, Ryan Cohen, who had launched Chewy as a pure e-commerce play. He had purchased at that point about 10% of the shares. and he wanted to see even more aggressive change. Now, one other important piece of the story is as I joined the board in April, the company had already had a few bruising fights with shareholders. And the company really didn't want to go through another bruising shareholder fight. So Ryan was invited onto the board. 2 other members of the prior Chewy management team joined the board. And the board was to be reconstituted at the upcoming annual meeting in June, and I was going to be part of that slate. And again, I thought that it made sense. I knew the video game business. I had strong perspectives on what needed to be done.
So what did you come to think of Ryan Cohen's strategy?
Well, the issue was that as the strategy was beginning to be developed, I asked to be part of the team to develop the strategy. I knew the business. I knew it as a consumer. I knew it as a vendor. I had pretty strong opinions on how the business needed to be pivoted. But I was rebuffed, right? The perspective was, Reggie, we want to keep the team small, and so it's going to be myself and a few of the people that I brought on board who, by the way, don't know this business, don't understand the players, et cetera, et cetera. I took that as code as, thank you, but we really don't want any other ideas. And for me, that was not acceptable.
So what do you think of the strategy now?
Well, there has not been an articulated strategy. I mean, if you could go on the Gamestop website, try and find a strategy, there is no articulated strategy. Leadership says, well, we don't want to articulate our strategy because we don't want anyone to steal our strategy. So I come from the business perspective that you need to articulate your strategy to all of your key constituents. You need to communicate to your business partners, your vendors, your employees, your shareholders. You need to communicate your strategy. And the 3 public boards that I participate on all communicate their strategy.
So what do you think is the fate of GameStop as it stands now? Like, where do you think the company is headed?
Let me put it this way. I'm no longer a shareholder.
So when did you sell? If you got shares at $3 to $4 a piece,
so we're not going to.
They were $200 when you left.
We're not going to go there in terms of the timing of my sale. But I voted with my pocketbook, and I sold. I still have friends in the business. I wish them the best of luck, but I do believe it starts with articulating a strategy so that the board can hold management accountable to executing the strategy, so that shareholders can evaluate the strategy, make their own bets with their pocketbook. But Emily, you said it well. Stock peaked at just under $500 a share. I didn't look where it is on Friday, but I think today it's about $100 a share. So I think the marketplace is also voting as to what they see.
So what do you think of the rise of the retail investor and the meme stock mania and how GameStop became the quintessential target?
Yeah. So I believe in the retail investor. I think the broad consumer base owning stocks is actually a good thing. So I believe in the retail investor.
And does that change the way you lead a company when you know your investors are not just hedge funds and big banks? Your investor is everyday people.
Yeah, I actually don't believe it changes how you run a company. And I don't believe it changes as a board how you hold management accountable. In the end, the goal is to create shareholder value. In the end, the goal is for the company to be worth more in the future than it is today. That's what drives the stock price up. And whether you're a hedge fund or you're an individual investor, you want to see that same dynamic. And managing the business in that way should be exactly the same. Now, with a retail investor base, you do need to communicate differently. right? You can't just have a bunch of individual meetings with your top 10 institutional shareholders. You need to more broadly communicate your strategy.
Yep.
But it's still the same thing.
When you look at the future of how we consume content, obviously it's not just games. There, is a war being waged in streaming. You've got all of the big tech companies trying to get into gaming. At the same time, you've got, Netflix, Disney, Hulu, Amazon. We're talking about the launch of CNN Plus a little bit later today. Where does this all go? Is there consolidation in this sort of attention economy? And who wins?
Yeah. So I think there's two different things worth highlighting. First, when you talk about streaming, here's what I find that is really interesting. As we sit here today, there are 3 pure play streamers, meaning no advertising, no other monetization. Mm-hmm. One of those 3, Disney, has said that they are looking at a lower price tier that would be monetized presumably with advertising. Mm-hmm. So, monetization with advertising, with a plethora of different choices, that there is some bundling and consolidation happening. Boy, maybe I'm old, but that's starting to look like cable, right? To me, what I see is that, yes, all of these different entities are going to create their over-the-top, direct-to-consumer distribution, but at some point there is going to be consolidation, there is going to be bundling. It's essentially going to be an over-the-top cable type of experience. I think that's where we're going. The other part of your question touches on a number of these entities are also getting into gaming. Netflix has begun getting into the gaming space. Apple is in the gaming space.
I've talked to analysts who believe that Netflix will be the biggest player in gaming.
Yeah, a lot needs to happen for that to play out. Gaming, it's first about the content, right? It's got to be compelling content that the consumer wants to play. Second is, how do I access it? Meaning, literally, how do I find it? How am I going to play it? What's the control scheme? How do I make it easy for me to play? How is it then curated so that I, as a consumer, can find a great game? These are all elements that, yes, Netflix has some experience in, but in the gaming space, it's all new ground. I will give them strong credit. They're working with some really smart partners. One of them is a small company that I do advisory work for. They've also just bought a quality developer, so they're going to learn about the development side of things. So Reed and the team are thinking about it the right way, but there's a lot of work to be done to be successful. Just ask Apple. Apple with Arcade has tried to go after a more curated experience. It's been challenging for them.
Apple, Google, and Amazon have.
Yeah, and again, each of these companies have had their different issues. Google, again, they believe that simply putting it on the cloud was going to be the big idea. It's not the big idea. You need content. You need accessibility. They didn't deliver on those elements. Amazon, I think, is a really interesting story because they have struggled, but they're having success today with a game that they launched about 4 or 5 months ago. What I find interesting about it is it's a game that actually had been in South Korea beforehand. They really worked to optimize it for a Western audience. So they took some elements of a successful gaming company playbook to make this new game effective. And it's working. It's working for them.
Question from the audience. What are some games you're playing currently?
Yeah, so here's what's interesting for me in retirement. So,
all of them.
When I was leading Nintendo, I was playing games that were already out in the marketplace from Nintendo, from all of the key competitors. I played it on my own. Every 2 weeks, I had my product development people take me through what they were playing. So I spent a lot of time with games that were already out. Today, I spend time with games that are still in development. I do this because I've acted as a juror for Tribeca and their their game efforts. I mentioned a company that I'm doing advisory work for. I see some of their early games and games that they're working with partners. I'm in a SPAC, and that's giving me access to early content. So I still see a lot of games. I still put my hands on a controller and play games, but it's different types of games today than what I've done in the past.
What do you see as the role of blockchain and crypto and play to earn in the future of gaming?
Yeah. So I'm a believer in blockchain. I think blockchain as a technology is really compelling technology. I'm also a believer in the concept of play to own within video games. And I say this as a player where I may have invested 50 hours in a game, 100 hours in a game. There are some games I've invested 300 hours in a game. And when I'm ready to move on to something else, wouldn't it be great to monetize what I've built? I mean, I bet I'd have some takers here today if I wanted to sell my Animal Crossing Island, from the latest Nintendo Switch version, right? I'd like to be able to monetize that. Blockchain technology embedded in the code and in the development would enable me to do that. So I'm a believer in the technology and where it's headed. Now, I say that in the context of it needs to make sense for the player. It can't just be an approach by the developer that it's interesting or it's a way for them as a development entity to make more money. In the end, it's got to be good for the player. But I see an opportunity.
I'm a mom. My kids play games in moderation. We're big on family costumes. We did Mario one year. I was Yoshi.
Come on, should have been Wario or Waluigi.
We had a couple of those. We've got four kids. How should we think about the impact of games on our children? It's something that I worry about, and I know a lot of parents, honestly, are terrified. And we feel like we've already sort of lost the war to technology in our homes, but don't know what the consequences will be. How do you think about it?
As an executive with Nintendo, those were the things that we preached and we talked about. A belief in parental controls, a belief in empowering the adult to make decisions for their child in what games they play. As children get older, playing a supervisory role, asking the question, what are you playing? Show me what you're playing. Show me the interaction with your friends. I think you have to be involved. And it's not just in gaming. It's Instagram and Snapchat and all of the other ways our kids interact digitally. As a parent, you have to be involved.
Question from Conrado in the audience. Do you foresee a market opportunity for the 40 or 50 plus generation given increasing longevity?
Absolutely. And again, I'll give an example from my Nintendo days. So the Nintendo DS, the vision for that product, really gaming for everybody. We wanted everyone to be playing on that device. And we went after that 50 plus market. We developed a game called Brain Age. Some of you may remember it. The whole idea was short little exercise, math problems, vocabulary, reading out loud, that in working with a neuroscientist in Japan, he had done work that showed that these types of short duration exercises stimulated your brain. And by stimulating your brain, you would be able to stay sharper later in life. And huge success for the company. What was interesting is as we were looking to bring this game into the Western markets, it had launched first in Japan, leveraging this person's fame and teachings. We needed to find a way to make it relevant for the Western market. So I was the one who advocated that we include Sudoku in it as a way to make it relevant. If I were doing it today, I'd find a way to include Wordle as a way to make it relevant for a broader audience. But the point here is, are there gaming opportunities for consumers 40 plus, 50 plus, 60 plus? Absolutely. And there are going to be companies that go after those opportunities. These are consumers who have income to spend. They've grown up around gaming, so it feels natural and is a regular part of their entertainment. I do believe it's a significant opportunity.
So, question from the audience. What soft skills do you think are indispensable for the next generation of business leaders?
I believe that having really strong communication skills, critically important. Verbal communication, written communication. While I was at Nintendo, I worked hard on my non-verbal communication skills. And what I mean by that is at Nintendo, the way business was conducted was that something would be said in Japanese. It would then be translated into English. I would respond in English, and then it would be translated into Japanese. And so I made it a point when Mr. Iwata or Mr. Miyamoto was making a point, I was watching all of those nonverbal cues. Because a translator wouldn't have those nonverbal cues. I wanted to know, are they excited? Are they passionate? Do they believe in a point? Are they disappointed? Are they angry? And so communication skills are going to be critically important for a next generation leader. Intellectual curiosity. Asking questions. And not asking questions just to challenge someone, but really wanting to understand, wanting to be clear on a person's perspective or point of view. Having intellectual curiosity, I think, is a critical part of being a successful next generation leader. And then the third one that I would touch on is just a fundamental belief in the power of diversity and diverse teams. Fundamental belief. It's not lip service. It's not just, let me salute the flag on diversity and inclusion. I have seen it. I have promoted it. When you have a variety of different points of view, whether it is sexual orientation, background, nationality, all of the things that make us different, you use those together to get to better solutions. Those are the three I would highlight right off the top.
Amen. So as you go into this next chapter of your business career, you mentioned you're doing a SPAC. The SPAC market has been a little iffy. How are you, choosing your targets? And are you concerned about the macroeconomic environment we're in? Obviously, there's a humanitarian crisis happening in Ukraine. It is rippling through the economy, and how do you invest and make smart decisions in this market?
Sure. So, for those in the audience, SPAC, Special Purpose Acquisition Company, a company that exists in the public market with the intention of merging with a private entity, and by doing so, the private entity becomes public. We raised $230 million. Our SPAC was oversubscribed by over a factor of 10. So there was a belief in our management team and in our thesis. Our management team are operators with experience in the digital industry, and we're focused on the digital industry and its adjacent markets. And there was a McKinsey study that showed SPACs that are run by operators versus by people purely from a financial perspective outperform. So we're operators. A key part of our sponsor team is the talent management company, UTA. UTA brings us access to information, to people. As a company, they've already done $1 billion worth of transactions in the digital space. That's a key differentiator for us. And then the third key differentiator is, as part of our sponsorship team, a merchant bank called Connaught, who's got offices in London and in New York, and they've been in the SPAC business for 7 years. So they understand the market, they've seen the ups and downs. So that's our SPAC. Why are we going to win out in the marketplace? Well, Our approach is to find those great private companies and bring something to those management teams in order for them to be an effective public company. Whether it's governance experience, whether it's financial experience. One of our board members historically has been one of the top executive recruiters in the gaming space. She knows everyone in the business, so she could help fill out a management team. We've been very thoughtful in the approach that we've taken to be successful in this endeavor. The SPAC market has not done well, and it's because in the transaction of taking these private companies public, the promises that have been made to investors have just been unreasonable. There was a great Wall Street Journal story that summarized this. They highlighted a company, I think it was an electric bike company, that said that they were going to be on a faster growth pace than Google was in its first 5 years. Electric bikes or electric scooters. I mean, it doesn't happen. And guess what? They went public through the SPAC. They took down their revenue estimates and got hammered in the public markets. So, the transaction has to make sense.
Are you concerned about the macro environment?
The macro environment right now is challenging. There is a war going on. It's not a special military engagement. It is a war going on in Europe and in Ukraine, and it is a horrendous situation. And so, yes, it is extremely concerning. The hope is that this ends up being a short-term issue versus a long-term issue, but it is an issue that's going to drag on the financial markets. That is a reality.
So one of the best questions for last year, it keeps getting upvoted, so I have to ask. Did you get to keep your Muppet of yourself from the 2015 E3 presentation?
Yeah, so again, the background here is during our big industry presentation, big industry event, we had this fabulous partnership with the Jim Henson Company, and we made puppets of the executives that transformed into characters from a game called Star Fox. I did not get to keep my puppet.
Who has it?
I did. It's there in the Nintendo of America offices, and they have it behind a glass display case. I did get to keep a feather from my Star Fox character. I have that in my office. But a lot of those treasures during my time at Nintendo, they were big. I had this Legend of Zelda sword in what looked like a rock. That stayed. I got to keep a lot of memories and a lot of wonderful perspective from having run Nintendo for over 10 years.
How did you keep a pulse on what gamers were looking for at Nintendo? And how can the folks in our audience keep a pulse on what their customers, whether they're gamers or otherwise, want in the next product, the next big thing?
Sure. So there are two things you need to do. So the first thing you need to do, whatever your industry, whatever your space, is you have to experiment everything that's going on, right? So, I mentioned this earlier. I played a lot of games. I looked at what our competitors were doing. I looked at analogies in other parts of the entertainment business. I cast the net wide to get inspiration. And I would share these inspiration with the developers back at Nintendo. But the other thing you need to do is constantly challenge yourself to do something new and different. Because I guarantee you, if all you deliver is what your customer currently expects, the overall results are going to be disappointing. You have to deliver something new, something unexpected. I talk about you have to focus on what's relevant and what's unexpected to be successful out in the marketplace.
All right. Reggie Fils-Aimé, we are at time. Or the Reginator, I should say. Thank you so much
Emily, thank you
for
so much.
joining us. It's been really great to be here with you.